Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today, very quick video on a ninja balance change that they made in War of the Visions. We knew it was coming, so it wasn't a huge surprise. We just didn't know when. And quite honestly, I thought it would have been in the announcements and the notifications, but to my knowledge, at least, I don't really seem to see it anywhere. But that aside, I at least wanted to talk about it briefly. So the balance change that's going into effect that JP already went through was essentially changing how much of the subvision card stat gets transferred over percentage-wise. So when they first introduced these subvision card stats, what you see on the screen is initially the percentage transfer of what those skills would get at. So if you had 35% luck, only 48% of that 35% number would transfer to the party, and for the unit effects as well. Now, obviously, this is a lot to remember in terms of which one's 48%, which one's 45%, which one's 40%. Quite honestly, it genuinely doesn't matter. They're relatively small overall in terms of materiality. And the new system that we're getting is effectively just sort of simplifying the tiers. So a lot of those other ones that were kind of in that mid-40s stratification is now just a balanced 50%. Some of them are just straight 80%. Some of them have given some overall buffs. And so I just want to talk about what you should expect balance-wise from this change. And the short answer is, quite honestly, not that much. In my opinion, I think this is really a quality of life thing done just for the ease of the user to know that, hey, 50% of that stat, as opposed to trying to remember, oh, is it 48 or 42 or 46? It really doesn't matter at the end of the day, and I'll show you in a second. So effectively, the ones that got the most drastic changes, crit evasion got a nice one going from 66 to 80%. Defense and spirit also got a nice buff here going from 30% transfer to 50% transfer, and a handful of these other ones in the middle got, between 8 and 10% for a fairly even mix of offensive and defensive oriented buffs. And I have that categorized whether or not it's the kind of stat that's better for defense or better than offense. So for instance, attack and magic is obviously most likely skewed for your offensive stats, whereas evasion overall is more of a defensive stat. Now, while some of these might pop off the page to you when you talk about realistically what's the actual balance change itself, it's really not as high as you might think. So this part that I'm expanding right now, and I'll zoom in just a little bit. So I have this column in here, like, what's the typical max stat of the card, and I'm going to use crit evasion because it's the high, second highest one here. It might pop off to a couple of you. Well, typically crit evasion that you might find on the Death Machine card is at 20%, while in the old system, 66% of that is 13, and in the new system, 80% of that is 16. So what's the real difference? You're getting 3% extra crit evasion on that subvision card. At the end of the day, is that really that impactful? Honestly, probably not. And if you're looking at the change in the majority of these stats, now again, the typical max stat here is just kind of generally speaking what you'd find. But overall, the change is really just an extra 2%, maybe 1% or 3%. Overall, I don't think that's really going to skew anything, particularly because it is a relatively even mix of offensive and defensive adjustments. My gut, though, if anything, you might notice just a smidge less overall damage in the game, primarily for, I would say, 3 reasons. Number one, the defensive stats that got changed, just the way that the damage formula works overall, it tends to favor them a little bit more as opposed to just some of the modifier increases. And a perfect example of what I mean, if you look at a attack type attack, so like slash attack up, you're going to get an extra 3% on the modifier, or 3 on the modifier. Well, attack type resistance, you're going to get an extra 2%. And just the way the formula ends up working out, that 2% actually means more than what the modifier gets in terms of mitigating damage. So although they might look similar, 3 and 2, the effective practicalness of it is a little more favorable to the defensive side. Obviously, the biggest changes, the crit evasion and the defense and spirit, are obviously more defensive based. And even then, relatively speaking, if you're looking at the increase to crit evasion versus crit rate, for instance, because that's obviously 2 things that go in directly into the equation, well, crit evasion got a buff of 3% and crit rate got a buff of only 2%. So effectively, crit evasion is only 1% higher than what you might have had if enemies have higher crit rates. So again, long story short, it's really not changing the overall balance of the game drastically. Really very minorly, in my opinion. Not enough so that you probably won't even notice, quite frankly. But that was it. Just want to make a quick announcement video, not only bringing some attention to it, but also just speaking a little more specifically about how it actually will affect your gameplay experience. And the answer is not that much. But thanks for watching anyway. Now I will talk to you all soon.